Hi, folks. Yeah, the talk I'm giving tonight is about the burden of responsibility, a burden that we all carry. And if we don't carry it, then we ultimately face consequences that we bring on ourselves. And we have the risk to harm others and ultimately harm ourselves. Everybody has some responsibilities in life. We all do. We're born with them. We tend to think that we're born with human rights, of course. Well, we are as well, but you don't have rights without responsibilities. And looking after other people's rights and respecting theirs, is part of our responsibility in whatever capacity we happen to be acting in. That's very true as parents, of course, where you have certain rights over children, the right to, speak on their behalf if they're too young and unable to, and to make decisions on behalf of them too. You have a responsibility to do that, to consider what's in their best interest. There's a duty of responsibility, of care that parents, that is those that strive to be good parents, have, of course. But it's not just parental responsibility. We all as citizens have that, in how we treat each other in our day-to-day life. If we witness somebody being assaulted, for example, whether we intervene and what course of action we choose to take. If we're acting in a certain job, that's true, of course. In many professional jobs where we're giving more power and, people have invested that authority within you, the burden then of responsibility is greater. Because when you have more rights, you have more responsibilities, whether you choose to acknowledge that or not, whether you choose to see the consequences of what your actions can be, both for yourself and for others, whether you choose to see that or not, there are responsibilities there. And I would say that it's very harmful to ourselves as well as other people. It's ultimately harmful to ourselves if we choose to act irresponsibly, especially when we're in a position of authority and we're in charge of other people, because we have the potential there to harm many people. But ultimately, our own self-worth, the potential for how great our soul can be, is what suffers. We don't live up to the true potential of who we could be. We let ourselves down in that sense. We would have to live, with a conscience of what we've done, or live without a conscience, potentially, which is very much like living without a soul, ultimately, isn't it? And many of us would believe the ultimate price you pay for that, the wages of sin is death, not death of the body, death of your soul, Of course, that's the positive outlook of it, There could be any number of punishments, ultimately, and I don't know what those would be. My belief, I suppose, is that God will judge us all fairly according to what we're capable and able to do, in the knowledge of what we have been able to do, what our abilities are mentally, physically, and what effort we've made, how we've acted. We might be able to fool some people some of the time, we do, but we're not able to fool God ever, any of the time, ultimately. Of course, a lot of people would say I'm deluded, and that may be wishful thinking on my part. I can't prove it, but then you can't disprove it either. So I suppose it's Pascal's wager, as they say. You take a gamble, and if you find at the end of your life, that turned out to be wrong, you pay the price, don't you? Whatever that price may be. And so I would say we all have that burden of responsibility within our lives. That's my look on it all, really. Whatever capacity you're acting in, we all carry that, and it's a difficult one. But it's more difficult to sort of choose not to, and to sort of wear a blindfold or sort of pretend that it's not there. And, I suppose if we are safeguarded from other people and we are beyond their judgment or punishment, it may be all too tempting to sort of buy into that possibility, that we can do whatever we want to, and there may be times like that. We've all had opportunities, haven't we? Where we could steal something or take advantage of someone, and nobody would be any the wiser, and we could get away with something, without anybody finding out. We've all had many opportunities like that in life. I know I have. But ultimately, you can't deny to yourself what you're doing. You have to live with what you've done. And that's perfectly okay if you, I suppose, choose not to have a conscience, if you choose not to live like that, But what does it mean not to have a conscience, I look at that as not having a soul, really. And I'm not really sure, I make lots of mistakes myself. I'm sure we all do. I do deliberate things wrong on purpose sometimes, as we all do, to a varying extent at least. But the idea of committing yourself to hiding secrets from other people until your dying day, it's very much like saying I'm going to live and die, as an actor, as someone who's pretending to others. Well, of course, many of us, our goal is quite the opposite. Our goal is actually to try and work towards being as honest as we can, as being transparent to other people, to saying and having the courage to say to anyone, what the truth is within our heart, actually what we feel. And the truth will set you free. There's that ideology. Many people believe that, many people don't. And some people are committed to being delusional until they die, and, the truth will imprison you in a mental kind of prison, really. And mental prisons are far worse than physical ones in some ways. And it's just as hard to escape from. Quite possible though, but confession is hard. If you've been committed to upholding and defending deceptive ways for a long period of time, it's like digging a hole, isn't it, really? It gets deeper and deeper and harder to get yourself out of it, really. It's like admitting to one lie, but then eventually, if you continue sort of covering up, eventually you're admitting to thousands of lies and over many years. And how much harder does that then become for you? But then you sort of feel like if you don't at some point decide to transform your life and to commit to actually trying to be honest to others and seeing the value of that, then you are committed to lying to many people, until your dying day. You're committed to being an actor, a pretense, a fraud, a double-minded person, living a double life. That's actually in psychiatry called a mental disorder. It's called multiple personality disorder. And that's where you have different personalities, you separate them, you act one way to one group of people, and another way to another group of people. And that is, diagnosable as a mental disorder, multiple personality disorder. And it's how some people commit themselves to getting away with certain crimes, by living that double or sometimes even treble lives, Well, we all do struggle to be honest to all the people all the time. I'm not saying there's not some occasions where it may be justifiable to be dishonest, depending on what that circumstance is. If you're, for example, protecting someone. But at the same time, you've got to question what your motives are in life, really. And I think it's worthwhile investigating what are the possible consequences too, if there is such a thing as a soul, if there is such a thing as Judgment Day or karma, if all the different religions and theologies over thousands and thousands of years, it may have some disagreements but common ground, if any of them have any truth, and the millions, hundreds of millions of believers, if they have any credibility or truth in at least some of what they're saying, well, it's worthwhile at least taking a few hours or weeks or to investigate. Otherwise it is a gamble, isn't it? And it's not just your life you're gambling, but it's your soul, isn't it? And the punishment of mankind is at least limited, isn't it, to one lifetime. The idea of being punished over many lifetimes, is something else, isn't it, really? And But I often think that personally that there is forgiveness for everyone. I like to think that it's there, but you don't get it if you don't ask for it, and that's the way it works. I think really, if you don't seek it, you're not going to find it. And I do love the idea that anyone, no matter how bad of what people have done, can be salvageable, can be redeemable. And I think that's a wonderful thing, to know the grace of being forgiven when you've done something awful, and we all have. Like, it's a wonderful thing to actually to have that forgiven, to be able to actually wipe the slate clean. It's like I can just liken it to washing after such a long time of just being covered in this ugly grime that is just a stench, and just the feeling is like being renewed. It is like being a totally different person. It's a hard thing though, isn't it? And it's a hard thing to admit to. It takes bravery. No one can deny that. Being, admitting to other people how flawed you can be. That's a difficult thing, and I admire anyone that has the courage to do that, to be honest with you. you know Especially when that has real world consequences, in your relationships, and how other people will view you, in your reputation perhaps as well. So, I think it's very admirable when people do that. I know that I've done and said some awful things to people over the years, and I've mistreated people, to such an extent that I'm ashamed of some things that I've done. I almost feel like two different people sometimes. I'm quite proud of some things I've done where I've gone out my way to help and support others, but, where I've taken advantage of others, or allowed my anger to sort of like drive me and just behave abusively sometimes. I'm quite ashamed of, some of the awful ways that I've behaved sometimes. Quite irresponsible, quite neglectful, and it's quite easy to say that in general terms, without going into the specifics of what that involved and who was hurt. But, I'm a complex person, and it's like I've done a lot of good and bad over many years. Point of fact, I don't think anyone really knows everything I've done, really. I don't think, or perhaps a few people know a few things, but yeah, it is hard to talk about to other people, actually. There's the fear of other people's judgment, isn't there, of course? That's difficult in itself, especially, talking to the people directly, your victims and their family and the friends, perhaps. What a wonderful thing it is actually to be forgiven, to be given a second chance, or even a third chance, in some cases. It is, to have that chance, is an incredible thing, actually. Obviously, not everyone will want to forgive and is able to, depending on their state of mind and their temperament and how they feel about what's happened, So that does depend, doesn't it? And what you say to others, you have to sort of very much consider, what effect that has and how necessary and positive it would be, So there's a lot of considerations to take, when to be honest and in what manner and how. But I do like to very much believe that no one is beyond, being forgiven if they have the desire to, and that, if they want to reconnect to the rest of humanity and wanting, to behave responsibly and to fulfill their own soul to becoming the best version of themselves that they can be. Who wouldn't want that? Especially when you think of what the consequences could be of that. You may not believe in that. For years I didn't. I was an atheist, and I didn't believe in God and Judgment Day. I certainly didn't believe in angels or demons or anything like that. I didn't believe that there would be anything after death. I didn't think there would be any karmic consequence for me. I just thought after death, that's the end, kapush. But I didn't have any evidence to prove that either. And I suppose I then spent years as an agnostic, sort of with an open mind. I had a blank page then, and I thought, I'd assumed that there is nothing after death. I just didn't know but that's what seemed popular, and lots of people thought that. I found that people that had these beliefs seemed irrational, and I couldn't see any proof for it. But then at the same time, if I'm honest, I hadn't really got out of my way to search and to seek answers, really.